These hieroglyphs reveal how Egypt fit million-ton walls, with no gaps in the machine behind it. In March 1971, an Egyptologist in Cairo opened a museum registry and changed 3 words. The limestone fragment Ahmed Fakhri had excavated at Saqqara 17 years earlier, described in his Field Notes Volume 7 as a mechanism of unknown industrial purpose, became under the pen of a new administration decorative funerary art. No new analysis was conducted, no second opinion from a material scientist or an engineer. Just a reclassification filed quietly under Director General Ibrahim El Nawi, moving the object from the category of unresolved to the category of explained. Fakhri was not consulted. He had already documented the fragment in the archive of the Institut Français d'Archéologie Orientale in Cairo, a separate institutional system from the Cairo Museum Registry. That means anyone looking at the official catalog entry for JE 98944 would read decorative funerary art and have no reason to know the field notes exist. No cross-reference, no flag, no footnote pointing toward the discrepancy. 2 records describing the same object, saying 2 completely different things, sitting in 2 separate buildings in the same city. That single gap is the door this investigation walks through. Because what Fakhri documented in those field notes, the glyph sequence, the determinative symbol attached to it, and the physical object that symbol designates, points toward something the official record went out of its way to stop being a question. A rotating device, used at Giza during the pyramid construction period. And the hieroglyphs that name it were carved on a limestone block that the Cairo Museum reclassified before anyone in the mainstream literature could connect it to the physical evidence already waiting inside the granite. This channel covers one suppressed anomaly per week, not conjecture, but documented discrepancies with catalog numbers, named researchers, and archive locations you can verify yourself. If that is the kind of history you are looking for, subscribe now and hit the notification bell so you do not miss what is coming. The glyph sequence on JE 98944 has a standard translation that circulates in the narrow academic context where the fragment has been referenced at all. The accepted reading produces a phrase interpreted as the great lifting of the house of Ptah, a religious dedication, unremarkable, the kind of funerary language that covers Old Kingdom tomb walls by the hundreds. For decades, the few researchers who encountered the fragment accepted that reading and moved on. But Fakhri's field notes record something the standard translation omits. Attached to the glyph sequence is a determinative. Ancient Egyptian scribes used determinative symbols to indicate the grammatical and conceptual category of a word. A determinative does not get transliterated. It does not appear in the phonetic rendering of a text. It is frequently the first element lost when a translation moves from a primary source to a published summary. The determinative Fakhri documented on JE 98944 is a seated figure interacting with a horizontal element, a classifier that appears in only one other confirmed location in the entire hieroglyphic corpus. That location is a papyrus fragment from Deir el-Medina, the workers' village on the west bank of Luxor, in a text describing tools brought to a specific construction site. The Deir el-Medina papyrus is not a religious dedication. It is an inventory entry. And that distinction matters enormously, because the determinative changes the grammatical category of the entire phrase on JE 98944. The phrase is not describing a spiritual act. It is naming a physical object. Embedded in that object's description is a word that Egyptologists have never successfully placed in a religious context because it does not belong in one. The word appears 3 times in Old Kingdom administrative texts that reference devices used at quarry sites. It does not appear anywhere in funerary literature or devotional inscription. The closest cognate in related Semitic root structures carries a meaning that no one has formally published, but several researchers have noted in private correspondence, some of which has since reached academic archives. The meaning is the thing that turns. That is only the first layer. The second layer is in the Wadi Hamamat, the dry riverbed passage cutting through the eastern desert of Egypt, connecting the Nile Valley to the Red Sea coast. The passage walls carry more than 250 documented inscriptions left by ancient expeditions across several dynasties. One of those inscriptions, catalogued as Hamamat Inscription 87 by the Egyptian Antiquities Authority, dates to the reign of Mentuhotep II, approximately 2000 BCE. The inscription records an expedition that brought back not only stone but what the text specifically identifies as the complete mechanism of the House of Ptah. That is the same phrase, the same grammatical structure, and the same administrative register as the glyph sequence on JE 98944, not a prayer borrowed from funerary tradition. Not a metaphor embedded in devotional language, a record of physical transport. Hamamat Inscription 87 continues past the inventory notation, The final line states that the mechanism was placed beneath the house of the horizon. That phrase in Old Kingdom topographical language refers specifically to the Giza Plateau. The inscription does not record what happened to the mechanism after it arrived. It records only that it arrived. That detail implies something important. A delivery record that ends at a destination and says nothing about destruction or dismantling implies that retrieval was expected. The mechanism was placed, not buried, not ritually interred, not destroyed. Placed. And then Hamamat inscription 87 ends, and the official textual trail goes quiet. But the stone does not go quiet. The stone is where the trail picks up again, and what it carries in its hidden surfaces is stranger than the inscription. In 2003, a materials analysis team from the University of Liverpool was granted access to examine tooling marks on granite casing stones at the Giza Eastern Cemetery. What they were documenting was the hidden side of the construction record. Not the polished outer faces that visitors photograph, but the interior contact faces, the surfaces pressed against adjacent blocks, never visible once the structure was complete, never prepared for an audience. On those hidden surfaces, the Liverpool team found something that did not fit the expected record of copper chisels and stone pounders. The marks are parallel grooves. They are consistent in depth to within 0.22 millimeters. They are arranged in a helical pattern. Helical cut marks require rotational force. Rotational force applied to granite at that scale and at that consistency, using the hand tools available in 2500 BCE, is not reproducible under controlled experimental conditions. Researchers have attempted the replication. The marks remain. The mechanism that made them has no agreed explanation in any published paper. The lead researcher, Dr. Alan Phillis, presented the groove documentation at the 2004 annual conference of the Society for Egyptian Archaeology and described the marks as consistent with a rotating cutting apparatus of unknown provenance. That presentation exists in the conference record. The groove data was published. A mechanism explanation was not. Here is what makes the groove geometry specific enough to matter in a way that generalities cannot. The pitch of the helical pattern, the angle and spacing of the grooves, matches the mechanical specifications of an Archimedean screw adapted for compression rather than fluid movement. The same geometry scaled for stone rather than water. That is not a loose analogy drawn to make the evidence seem more dramatic. It is a precise engineering comparison, and it was noted by Dr. Christopher Dunn, a precision machinist whose work involves tolerances finer than most archaeological instruments can measure. Dunn obtained partial rubbings of the groove sequence through the Oriental Institute in 1998 and submitted an analysis to the Journal of Egyptian Archaeology. The submission was declined without stated cause. The limestone relief at the Cairo Museum names a rotating device. The granite blocks at Giza carry the marks that device would leave. Those two facts sit in separate archives in separate disciplines and have never been formally connected in a published paper. That absence of connection is itself a documented fact, and it is not explained by the academic position that the marks are natural or the result of standard tool use, because standard tool use does not produce helical grooves consistent to within 0.22 millimeters across a construction surface that was never intended to be seen. If the mechanism was not made for show, it was made to work. And if it was made to work, the question that no published study has yet addressed is who made it, who operated it, and where that knowledge came from. That question has a DNA answer, and the answer arrived from a direction no one anticipated. In 2021, a team of researchers published a study in Nature Communications analyzing ancient DNA extracted from 93 individuals buried at Giza and Saqqara across a 500-year window spanning the core pyramid construction. Period. The study's primary focus was population movement during the Old Kingdom. What it found in a subset of the burial population was not expected. The individuals buried with administrative grave goods, the organizational class rather than the labor class, carried a mitochondrial haplogroup distribution that included lineage X2b. Haplogroup X2b is concentrated today in the northern Levant and anomalously in isolated communities in the Zagros Mountains of western Iran. The Zagros Mountains are not a random geographic detail in this investigation. They contain the oldest documented copper smelting sites in the ancient Near East. They also contain the earliest known archaeological examples of Archimedean screw precursor technology dated to the late 4th millennium BCE. That predates the Egyptian Old Kingdom by several centuries. The people buried at Giza with administrative authority during the period when the helical groove marks were being made in granite carried DNA linking them to the precise geographic region where the mechanical precursor to the device, described on JE 98944, first appears in the archaeological record. That connection has not been addressed in any mainstream Egyptological publication. Before moving forward, the mainstream position deserves to be stated with full accuracy because it is not a weak position, and it would be dishonest to treat it as one. Archaeologist Mark Lehner's excavations at Giza have uncovered a workers' village, administrative buildings, and bakeries scaled to feed a labor force numbering in the thousands. Tool deposits consistent with copper chisels, stone pounders, and wooden sledges have been documented across multiple sites. Engineer Franz Lohner has published mathematically detailed proposals for rope and pulley systems sufficient to raise the required stone loads. The ramp and sledge model is not speculation. It is built on decades of physical evidence from one of the most extensively excavated sites in the world. The Egyptians were sophisticated engineers working with well-understood materials, and the observable construction evidence is largely consistent with the tools they are known to have possessed. The helical groove marks on interior contact faces are not consistent with those tools. That single fact has not been addressed in any mainstream pyramid construction study published since the Liverpool team's 2003 documentation. The data exists. The citation trail ends there. A third archive sits alongside these two in parallel, older than Egypt by centuries, and what it contains is not mythology. It is a Babylonian record, and its language is the language of a witness. The tablet that matters here is known through what survives of its documentation as the Anzu fragment, excavated from in October 1924 during Leonard Woolley's field season. What made Woolley stop was not the tablet's size, roughly the dimensions of a man's palm. It was the script. Every other tablet from that layer was written in a form of Sumerian his team could read without difficulty. This one was not. The symbols were older by centuries at minimum. A tablet written in a script predating the civilization it was buried inside was not a thing that should exist. The Anzu fragment does not appear in any published catalog from the excavations. It carries no accession number. It was never transferred to the British Museum or the Iraq Museum. A photograph taken by Woolley's assistant in 1924 shows a clay tablet on a linen cloth, partially obscured by shadow, with a caption reading, "Not for reproduction." What survived of the tablet's content came through 3 independent channels. Harold Spicer at the Oriental Institute in Chicago received a rubbing through a private source in 1938 and spent 18 months working on it. His notes, filed under miscellaneous correspondence in the Oriental Institute archive under a label that suggests someone decided they should not be easy to find, contain 12 pages of partial translation, several astronomical diagrams, and a single marginal sentence written in a hand, more agitated than his earlier entries. It reads, "If this date is correct, it has already been set." In 2021, Dr. Nadia Voss at the Free University of Berlin published a reconstruction of the text based on high-resolution photographs of Spicer's original rubbing. Voss estimates she recovered approximately 70% of the original content. What the recovered 70% contains is not what anyone expected a tablet of this age to hold. The text is written entirely in past tense. Every event it describes is framed as something the author witnessed, survived, and recorded for a reader who would come later. This is not how Sumerian prophetic literature works. The vast corpus of divination tablets that form the backbone of Mesopotamian cuneiform literature are written in conditional form. If the moon is surrounded by a halo, the king will die. The Anzu fragment uses no conditional constructions. Its grammar is the grammar of testimony. The author is not forecasting. The author is remembering. Among the things the author describes, in the middle section that Voss has translated with the highest confidence, is a sequence of physical changes to stone and earth that precede a specific event. The author's language for one of those changes is a compound that does not appear in any other known tablet. Voss translates it as the stone that is made to turn in its place without moving from it. The stone that turns without moving. The author is not describing the water-lifting device that most historians associate with the Archimedean screw. The author is describing what happens to stone when the device is applied to it. The compression effect. The rotation that does not transport but transforms the material interface at the point of contact. That is a description of exactly the physical mechanism that would produce the helical groove marks found on the interior contact faces of the Giza granite blocks by the Liverpool team. The Anzu fragment was buried before Giza was built. Its author describes the mechanical principle. Giza's hidden stone carries the physical evidence. And the hieroglyphic inscription at Saqqara names the device in administrative language with a determinative that places it in the category of things that operate rather than things that are venerated. The Book of Enoch carries this same current, though the language it uses is not engineering. It is the language of geography and precision, and those two things together are what make the Enochic parallel harder to dismiss than it might initially appear. Enoch 17-5 describes the narrator being taken to a place beyond the Great Sea where the waters above and below converge. The gaze reads Bahi Abi, the Great Sea, not a symbolic ocean, but an actual body of water with depth, with a floor, with specific material properties. Verse 7 describes the floor of that place as dark stone, smooth and cold, unlike any stone found on land, dark, smooth, cold. What Enoch is describing, though he had no mechanism to know it, is basalt, the volcanic rock that forms the ocean floor. No ancient writer could have known that. The deepest ancient divers could reach was perhaps 100 feet. The ocean floor sits 2 miles down on average. Enoch describes it accurately, in the same matter-of-fact register that characterizes a survey record rather than a vision narrative. What the Enochic tradition adds to this investigation is the concept of precision applied to unseen construction. The book is not only a cosmological text, it contains detailed numbered descriptions of physical structures with materials, spatial relationships, and geometric properties. The same sensibility that characterizes a builder's record. Dr. Ephraim Isaac, whose 1983 Oxford translation produced directly from the Ethiopian Ge'ez manuscripts remains the scholarly benchmark for Enoch research, noted in archived correspondence at the University of Manchester that several Ge'ez passages in the cosmological sections of Enoch employ the compound Adar Naphas, which he rendered as the reservoir of breath, and that the phrase carries a secondary technical meaning in classical Ge'ez that has been consistently overlooked by translators working from secondary editions. The phrase describes a chamber that holds pressure, not symbolically. In the engineering sense, a sealed container in which something is retained under compression. The Book of Job makes the underlying mechanical question explicit in a way that most English translations flatten into abstraction. Job 38-4-6 asks where the reader was when the foundations of the earth were laid, who set its cornerstone, when the morning stars sang together. The Hebrew word for cornerstone there is even, which in its architectural usage specifically refers to a fitted stone, a stone placed precisely against another stone, such that the two surfaces conform without gap. The question is not rhetorical decoration. It is the same question the Giza granite poses when examined under magnification. How were blocks weighing millions of tons fitted against each other with tolerances the Liverpool team measured at less than 1/4 of a millimeter? Proverbs 8:30 adds a second layer. The wisdom figure speaking throughout that chapter describes herself as Ammon beside the Creator during the act of construction. Ammon in the Hebrew is a word that translators have rendered as craftsman, as master workman. The word's technical root in related Semitic cognates carries the meaning of one who works by precise measure, one who applies a known standard to a physical substrate. The Egyptians had a word for that principle applied in stone. It was mat. Not justice in the abstract sense, the word is usually given in English popular culture. In its architectural register, mat was the principle of exact conformity, of surfaces meeting surfaces as they were intended to meet, without deviation. The Egyptians carved mat's name above doorways and into foundation deposits because they needed a name for what the machine made possible. Now there is one more location in this record, and it is the one no research team can yet access. Beneath the Giza Plateau, ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted by the Scan Pyramids project identified a series of subsurface anomalies beneath the causeway, connecting the Khafre Pyramid complex to its valley temple. One of those anomalies, designated in the Scan Pyramids technical report as anomaly G7, measures approximately 9 meters in its longest detected dimension and sits at a depth consistent with Old Kingdom subterranean construction. The anomaly was identified. It was logged. It was not excavated. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities has classified the Khafre Causeway corridor as a protected zone pending a comprehensive master plan for Giza subsurface investigation. That master plan has been in active development since 2018. No excavation permits for anomaly G7 have been granted to any research team. The Scan Pyramids project, which produced the radar data that found it, does not hold excavation rights. The void sits beneath protected limestone that cannot be disturbed without ministerial authorization that has not been issued. Anomaly G7 sits at a precise point along the route that Hamamat inscription 87 records the mechanism, traveling on its way to being placed beneath the House of the Horizon. The mechanism arrived at Giza according to an inscription carved at the time of transport. It was not recorded as destroyed or removed, it was placed. In the administrative language of Hamamat inscription 87, that word is the language of storage, not burial, not ritual interment. Storage implies the mechanism remained. A 9-meter void at Old Kingdom depth on the exact route the transport record identifies, in a subterranean zone sealed behind ministerial protection since the radar first found it. The permits remain pending. The void remains sealed. The limestone above it has not been touched. A limestone fragment at the Cairo Museum names a rotating device in administrative hieroglyphs and carries a determinative that moves it from the religious category to the mechanical one. Granite blocks at Giza carry the helical marks that device would leave, consistent to tolerances that copper chisels and stone pounders cannot produce. A Wadi Hamamat inscription records the transport of the complete mechanism to the Giza plateau and documents its placement without recording its removal. The individuals who oversaw the construction carry genetic markers linking them to the Zagros Mountains, precisely where the mechanical precursor to the described device appears in the archaeological record earliest. A Babylonian tablet of uncertain origin describes the compression principle the device employs in language that Sumerian prophetic literature uses nowhere else. The Book of Enoch, preserved for centuries only by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and confirmed authentic by the Dead Sea Scroll fragments catalogued as 4Q206 at the Israel Museum, uses precision language and material description in its cosmological sections that belong in an engineering record, not a vision narrative. And beneath the plateau, at the end of the transport route, a 9-meter void sits at Old Kingdom depth, behind permits that have not been issued in 7 years. The hieroglyphs on JE 98944 were reclassified in 1971. The groove data from the Liverpool team has not been addressed in any mainstream construction study since 2003. The permits for anomaly G7 remain pending. Fakhri's field notes in the archive of the Institut Français d'Archéologie Orientale describe what the museum eventually labeled decorative art. Those notes say something different. They have said something different for 70 years. The mechanism, the hieroglyphs name, fit granite blocks weighing millions of tons to tolerances no hand tool in the known Egyptian record can explain. The textual traditions of 3 separate civilizations, Egyptian, Babylonian, and Enochic, each independently describe in their own register the same physical principle, a rotating compression device, one that transforms the interface between stone surfaces. That turns without moving. That makes the fit precise. That made Mott actual in stone rather than theoretical. Whatever it worked. The blocks are still there. The gaps between them are still invisible. And the machine that made those gaps disappear has not been found.